that we've been working with. Basically, you can see these two logos. There's Sustainable Energy for Conservation, which is a social enterprise that we just registered with help from WWF Switzerland. And I've been working with many other organizations, but most prominently with the WildAid Foundation. And basically, I'm going to present to you about two deterrent measures. I do work with predator conservation, and I do work with conservancies, but mostly with human-wildlife conflict mitigation, basically a service provider to different organizations across the board. In Kenya, I've also worked a bit in Tanzania and quite a bit in Zambia. And now we're also helping out with organizations in Namibia as well. So basically, I'm not really talking about an area or a project area that we're working with, talking about the services that we provide. Stand here so I can see properly. Yes, so the four ethos that we go with, that is proaction, because we go into an area, we find an issue. It doesn't have to be lion or elephant related. It could be hippos, it could be snakes. I'm working on a challenge with snakes in one area in Kenya. And the issue is that you have to be proactive and you have to sit down and scratch your head and figure out how to get around it. And as we all know, with animals in different areas, there's no silver bullet. You have one thing that works across 60% or 70% of the areas, and you go to another area and the animals just look at you and say, we know how to get across that. So you have to keep shuffling around and looking for new innovations every day. That way the innovativeness comes in. And of course, if anything has to work, you have to bring in the participation of the community. Because if I give you a bottle of water, and you're waiting for me to come and fill it up for you, and then when you finish it, that's going to be a problem because I can't be everywhere all the time. But we basically make our solutions as simple as possible, as reliable as possible. We've been working on that. And the idea is to be able to teach the community on how to install, on how to repair, on how to actually think forward and even modify those systems. Because we don't look at our deterrent measures as a closed end. They're not a finished product. It's something that if a community member or an organization out there finds a better idea based on what we've given them, we're happy about that. Because human-wildlife conflict is something that we all have to deal with together. And of course, there's monitoring and regulation, which is very key to everything. And of course, these are familiar photos for all of us here. It all starts, how do you want this? It all starts like that, with the lion eyeing the cow, and it ends up like this. And of course, everyone here has been repeating these same points, that although in some areas nocturnal predation might vary in percentage, it might not be as high as others. For example, in my experience with the area next to Nairobi National Park, nocturnal predation is about 78%. And in other areas, for example, where I come from on the Athi Kapiti, nocturnal predation goes down to about 60%. The issue is, at the end of the day, even in an area like Selengei, where nocturnal predation is about 40%, it's the most emotive kind of predation because people feel invaded. With the time when I had one guy telling me I have to sleep underneath a mosquito net with the goats to prevent lions eating my goats. I don't get to sleep in the comfort of my house or see my wife. And anytime I think I can sneak out at 5 and go to the house, the lion is watching me, jumps in and gets my goats. So I feel, harassed, I feel invaded, and in the morning I have to get up and go to work and find food for my kids, which is not fair. So even if it's, even down to 20%, people will normally retaliate because of nocturnal predation because it invades the personal space. And of course, spotted hyenas lead a higher percentage in predation. This I have seen true in Kenya and also Zambia, where I've gone to quite a few areas, and spotted hyenas are the biggest case. And unfortunately, for example, in a lot of the landscapes that I've worked in Kenya, people don't know how to deal with hyenas. They don't know how to kill them. It's a bother. But if they've been dealing with the hyenas for a whole year and a lion walks in, even if the lion just looks at a cow, they'll say our opportunity for vilification is here. And they'll kill the lion and make a political statement and say, hey, we've been losing our livestock, nobody's been listening to us, this lion killed 10 cows yesterday, do something about it. But you'll find in most cases that the lion is actually innocent, or the cheetah is actually innocent, but it was actually hyenas and leopards that are causing the problem. So we have found that, for example, I've been working with an organization called Action for Cheetahs in Kenya, and one of the major objectives that we're trying to work on together is predator deterrence and safe bomas, because even though cheetahs very rarely go into bomas, actually in my experience I've only seen it once, it impacts on their survival very heavily, because when leopards do, no one is going to find a leopard during the day, they'll find the cheetah. And no one is going to look for the hyena, they'll go looking for a cheetah or a lion to retribute. So we have to cover the whole spectrum of predation to make sure that every single species is protected. And of course, predation is not just down to poor husbandry in terms of the build of the boma or how you graze your cattle. It's an education. If you have predators, a population of predators in your ecosystem, you educate them as to what is acceptable and what is not. For example, in Nairobi National Park, we had 3 prides of lions. And one pride lived in an area where the community would go into the park, and because they would go into the park, they had some guilt. When they came out and the lions followed them and they lost a cow or 2, they would not really tell anyone because they were not supposed to be near the park at 5 in the morning or 4 in the morning in the bush, right? So the lions realized that, hey, we can get away with this. So what happened is that those lions started teaching their cubs. And we actually got evidence very many times when we found lions actually going out into the community area, 5-7 kilometers away from the park, and taking their cubs with them, and actually entering enclosures, and actually killing and eating sheep inside the homestead with their cubs, very small cubs, 6-month-old cubs, 4-month-old cubs, and it did not make sense for the lions to be hunting with these cubs, only that they were teaching them that this is an available food source, and we are allowed to do this once in a while as long as you're careful, and that was an education in itself. Now, I've seen, for example, on the ranches that I've worked in, that you can actually educate predators to stop looking at predation as something they can get away with. And there's active education as to this. You keep on chasing them, it's arduous, and you keep on, it's negative and positive reinforcement like you do with dogs. But I've seen it work with lions quite a few times, and I've also seen it work in a limited way with hyenas. Hyenas are more tricky. So when it comes to the predator deterrence, per se, we have the predator deterrent lights, because this is something that you will find even communities out there who have never heard of this idea trying out. They will have their torches, they'll hang them on the tree, and they'll let the wind sway them in the night. And a lot of people think the psychology of it, the animal thinks there's someone standing there with a torch. Yes, that works with the novelty. Everything new is a bit scary, and for a few weeks or months, the animals will look and say, these guys don't sleep nowadays. But after a while, they will actually pick up the courage and go around and investigate. And they'll take a few trajectories around the boma and realize the human scent is still emanating from the house, and this light does not have any actual presence behind it. So, what works with the lights? In my how many years is it now? In my 6 years of experience with lights, I have slept inside bomas with cattle when lions are walking around with lights. I have put out camera traps And I've spent nights watching from a tree and all that kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, the only thing I can surmise from my experience is that the intensity of the light is what matters. It's basically how much risk can you stack up against the tolerance of a criminal. Let's just put it that way, to anthropologize, make it human. So this lion is coming, or this hyena is coming to steal a cow or a goat. And the thing is, can it get away with it? How much risk is involved? And that risk is pitted against the confidence the lion or the hyena has. Now, this is made true by the fact that we have seen in all our installations where we have installed over, I think over 750 bombers now since 2012 in Kenya, Tanzania, and Zambia. We have only had about 3 lions and 1 leopard going to bombers with lights that were actually working. There's a reason I'm saying actually working, because our issue has not been animals getting into lit bombers. Our issue has been the technicalities of keeping lights running year in, year out. So in the lights, in the bombers that have been working and that have, being monitored and are coming on, because initially we had a system where people used to put on the lights, and sometimes they used to forget, or somebody gets late in town and they don't put it on, or the kids don't know where to switch it on. We came up with a system after just a few months of starting off, where the system would come on automatically at dusk. And of course, the reason why we started off with a very basic system is we had this mantra that if we have an idea that can actually work, we're not going to sit in a lab for 10 years and perfect it. In 10 years, we won't have any lions or hyenas left. We need to start working today, whether it's clumsy or not. If it saves 1 lion, it makes sense. So we decided we're going to put it down and we're going to work on it as it works in the bush. And I can tell you it's been a headache. You get called hundreds of kilometers to fix 1 cut wire, which takes you 5 minutes to fix, and you've just driven 300 kilometers. And if you don't do that, there's a livestock predation, and years or months of peace is broken by 1 incursion. And we've gone from there to actually getting systems now that we're pretty confident with, and it's been a bit nerve-wracking because people say, look, it doesn't work. But you keep running around. But the fact that people will come once in a while and say, look, we actually have lions, we have hyenas, we have predation has come down by this percentage, that makes sense. So what was I saying? I was saying that out of the 700 bombers that we have done so far, the ones that were working, we found that effectiveness was coming up to about 98%. We only had 3 lionesses who jumped into bombers and 1 leopard. And the thing that these 3 lionesses had in common is that they are all pack lions. And they are very ardent stock killers. And the other thing that they have in common is that these lionesses actually went for bombers that they have raided since they were young. I know 1 lioness that I really studied in Nairobi National Park called Athi. She's still there. She's actually collared by KWS. And she would go to this bomber and sit outside the house, behind the house, and lie there. You find how she's been lying there for quite a while, because she really leave a lot of tracks. And she would be listening for the people to sleep. That was my guess. I didn't have proof. I wish I could put a camera trap. But in respect to how she lay there, she lay sideways behind the house, and it was like she was listening to these people go to sleep. And once that happened, she'd go around to the nearest bush, always from predictable angles. And from that bush, she'd close her eyes. How do I know this? Her footsteps, the distance from one step to the other would reduce. She would stumble over twigs, she would stumble over rocks, she'd walk straight into a bush. But then she would then orient herself with the lights, because even with her closed eyelids, she could see the flashing light. And the reason why I say this is that on 7 occasions out of 10, she would break the stem of the bulb that she was heading for. And once she jumped in, she would then open her eyes and kill. And we really wondered, why is this happening? Why, one lioness in Lake Jipe who was eventually killed for not wanting to leave the village and being suspected of being rabid. Another one in Amboseli who was an ardent stock killer called Osama and finally was shot when she grew old and did not respect people. And Athi, who is still alive in Nairobi National Park and is a bit of a controversy. And one other in Soisambu. And we wondered, why is this happening? And we went down to Zimbabwe to test the lights with lions that had actually been brought up in captivity, and others that were actually put in an enclosure and never seen human beings, never been in contact with human beings. And the same lions in the same facility, the ones that were not confident of human beings, did not go near the boma with lights. The ones that were brought up by people and were still in a wild situation, were hunting for themselves, but had had human contact, came right in and just jumped in without fear of the lights. So it came down to confidence. And that's why I say confidence pitted against the risk of getting away with the crime. So that's how the lights work. We have since last year come up with a new system, and it's been an arduous journey. Those were among the first lights we ever did. You can see that's a bulb socket. We had to start somewhere. And they used to get corroded and when it rains and all that kind of stuff. But the LED bulbs are really tough. And when we started off, there were no LED bulbs in the African market. So we had to send someone to China to find a light that could actually, work under tough conditions. And it was a good find because some things remain standard. So the wire and bulb system had an average of 18 months. You'd find some bombers go for 6 months and give you trouble for the rest of their lifetime. And you keep on fixing them, and there's no technical explanation why that particular bomber keeps breaking down. And yet the neighboring bomber easily did 3 years or 4 years. I know a couple of bombers that have done 4 years without any trouble. But the thing is, this wire and bulb system, we would put a central solar panel, a charge controller, and a battery in the house, and then we would wire 12 lights around the bomber. And you're talking about 200 meters of probably, we started with audio-visual wiring because the issue was we needed to keep the systems as affordable as possible because there's a threshold as to how much community will pay to keep the cattle safe. Because, beyond a certain point, they'd rather just go buy some poison or they'll take a spear and go kill the lion. It's cheaper that way. So we figured out that the threshold was about $250. So for that, we had to find components that actually fitted the bill. So we started off with audio-visual wire. We went up a notch and actually got donations for better wire. But at the end of the day, wire is wire. It cuts when it's eaten by goats, and goats seem to like wire. It cuts when the cows step on it and it's muddy, and their hoofs go through the mud and they cut the wire. And when the wire cuts and short circuits, it short circuits the battery. And then you have to change almost half the system. All the lights are interconnected. So when one thing goes wrong, everything goes wrong. So that's where we started. And as I said, bombers in Kenya, bombers in Tanzania, we've done West Kilimanjaro and Dumet, we've done Nainoka in Ngorongoro, we've done Loliondo, Ewaso on the Serengeti corridor, we've done Manyara, Tarangire corridor with Kisui. It's been a long journey. It's been a long journey. We've had to go back to places and replace bombers. In other places they say, it worked very well, but how come it died? So, we're still trying to trace back our steps, go back. And for example, now I've started a campaign where for every 100 new bombers I do about 20 replacements of old systems free of charge. So I go back and put in the new wireless systems, which we are very confident of. So we started working on the standalone system 3 years ago. We got a prototype. By the way, the old system used to cost about $250 to $300 a piece. I think I'll just refer to this a bit. One thing we learned on very early is that we had to work with the local carnivore and conservation organizations. When we first started, we did about 110 trials across Kenya, and we did this in conjunction with the local carnival organizations that were working in those areas. And the thing was, we knew that we need to keep following and having tabs on what is happening and getting an objective eye to tell you exactly what the experience is and to get people who had actually data on the bombers that we're installing. So for example, when I went to Amboseli, I got in touch with Daniel Sambu and Richard Bonham the first time, and they gave us the hotspot bombers, and they had the data of what the predation was. I also talked to the Lion Guardians, the same with Laikipia, the same with Amara, and all that kind of stuff. And I think that kind of collaboration is what matters, and that's why I'm saying we are a service provider. So for example, this is in Tanzania, where those two gentlemen were on an installation training. I think Kisui knows them. And that up there is the kids being warned about touching the lights, or else they'll get beaten by a lion or electrocuted. And for example, this is a third edition of lights that we were doing with the WWF, who've actually helped us quite a bit. And this is, for example, one of the most cumbersome systems that actually worked very well for ranches. We have community bombers and ranch bombers. And the difference being, for example, with Olpejeta and Lewa, they have the moving bombers that they move around every 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And for those bombers, you cannot have wires. We put wires and they would get cut, and we always had to repair. And they started pushing us. Can't we get something a bit more nifty, because the lions have figured out how to chase the cows against the bombers or jump into the bombers. We just need something extra. So with the insistence, we went into this system. That is actually a 7-amp battery. So this light actually is about 1 kilo, and it came with a hook. And you have to charge it every 10 days. Take it to a charger and charge them all, and then it will work for 10 days. And you have to switch it on every time. But the good thing is that they actually outlasted the other systems. Thing is, it's not as easy to fix a flashing light as you may think it is. You need to consider overcharging your battery. You need to consider what size of solar you need. You need to consider rainy days. You need to consider corrosion. You need to consider rate of flash and intensity. And intensity is one of the trickiest things. So putting all that in an affordable circuit is one of the hardest things. We've worked on it for years, and we only just cracked it. So for example, that's not a winning circuit for information. It just shows, we've gone through 150 circuits to get to where we are. But technology, but I think mostly the persistence and the amount of coffee and spending nights. You see, for example, all those papers are different sizes of resistors. I had to learn how to do electronics and solar from scratch, because it does not help to sit down with an electrician who does not have the passion or the time to spend 2 nights and 2 days working on something with you, because he has a family. So you have to teach yourself how to do it, because then you have to do it yourself. So that is what we were getting to. We had a prototype, but we did not have the capacity to mass produce it or get components that were consistent. We would buy components, and a month later when we got more other components, there'd be a small fraction of difference of 0-point-something ohms, which would mean the flash should be less, or the flash would be faster, or the light would go off at a different time. So at the end of the day, we had to standardize it and get to a point where we could mass produce. And that's where we got some help. We won a grant in Switzerland, WWF, and we managed to go, sorry, I think I skipped that. Yes, it stops there. So we managed to go to China last year, and after a lot of work with technicians in different companies, about 5 different companies, we came up with something that works. But the thing is, we have to pick components from different people for them to have the optimum thing. So at the end of the day, what we're doing right now is that we buy different components from different people, and we assemble this in Kenya. So this is put on a boma. You put it on a rafter, and when there's sunlight, it goes off. I guess the light isn't enough, but when there's sunlight, it goes off. When it's dark, it goes on. And this particular light on a full charge can go 6 days and nights. That's about 720 hours on one charge. Thing is, it has a solar panel, it has a lithium battery, which has a lifetime of 4 years. And we give this out with a 2-year warranty. The good thing about it is that if one goes off, the others are still working. The effective range is between 18 meters between lights, but we usually advocate for 15 meters. If your boma is small, you can even do 10, it does not harm. But the good thing about it is that it's very bright, it's about 80 lumens. It's 20 lumens brighter than the wire and bulb system that we had. And if one light conks out, you just put it on a courier, we pay for it, and we give you a fresh one. That's a 2-year warranty. So we don't have to travel 300 kilometers to come and check on a wire. Number 2, we are working on a trade-back agreement where when the battery gets to its 4-year marker, you trade it in, pay a small amount, and you get a fresh light with a new battery. This is, of course, for environmental purposes because we don't want battery pollution. We want to recycle our batteries, and yeah, because we're planning on becoming multinational. So that is the new SPDL, Predator Deterrent Light. Elephant restraining lines. Now, everyone talks about elephants, chili, bees, beehives, and all that. And I think, as we say, there's no silver bullet. And one thing works for one reason, and it doesn't work in another area because of another reason. In one area because of the elephants, in another area because of the community attitude, and different factors. We were looking at, we were called to South Luangwa in Zambia to look at an issue where they had done beehives, and after the organization that was funding the beehive project left, the community just let it run down. They did not have the momentum to keep it going. Then they started on chili, and they even had chili bombers in Fue town where the elephants come at night, and you hear these muskets go off, and you think Malawi is invading. And the farmers would plant chili, but after a while they did not. The motivation was not there to really plant chili and keep on replenishing it on the lines. So it was an issue of community attitude. So they said, no, do you guys have any ways of keeping elephants away? And the issue with elephants there is that when, like I think in many other places, when the maize is in the farm, the elephants are there. And when you take the maize from the farm into the houses, the elephants are also there. And we found houses with holes, roofs stripped off. I saw one village where everyone had moved out. It was in a WMS area where everyone had moved out because of elephant conflict. And I've never seen human beings moving for animals, but I saw that. It actually gave me a lot of encouragement to the power of elephants. It brings back your faith in Africa. But anyway, so we came up with a system of restraining lines, and the idea was not just to have a conventional fence. The idea was to have something that a farmer can get up and implement themselves. Because, a lot of these ideas need capital. They need a lot of donor dollars. But what about the subsistence farmer in Mount Kenya, in Amboseli? The guy who can save, maybe $1,000 or $500. What can he do to protect his crops without having, to walk up to KWS or go begging to a wildlife organization? For example, people go to the agrovet and buy herbicides when they need to deal with issues with their crops. They buy fertilizer, they buy all that kind of stuff. Why can't a farmer be able to walk into a shop and buy a deterrent and still have elephants in the area, but not in his farm? And the things that actually motivated us were a couple of things. These are orthodox fences. With an orthodox fence, because it blocks everything, you can't just put it across somebody's property. because then you're saying that, you choose. You either live here or you live there. And people will usually say, I have 100 acres. I want to do a fence against elephants. You put it around my boundary. And you're like, okay, why are you chasing the elephants from your 100 acres? Oh, I have a 10-acre farm, and they're invading it. And you're like, can't you just fence off your 10-acre farm? And like, no, the cost of doing the 10-acre is too great. I'd rather add a bit more because the wire doesn't really cost that much, and just do the entire area so that my cattle, I also protect my pasture. And so we asked the question, what if you had a cheap enough system that you could fence off that farm and figure out a way of dealing with your pasture, but let elephants roam the other 90 acres of your land? And the answer we got in quite a few areas where we did interviews in Kenya and in Zambia, in the western regions, that's Sioma, Ngwezi, Livingstone, and South Turanga, where we did this, is that the farmers were willing to let the elephants roam the rest of their land as long as they could protect their core interests. Their core interests being the households, the villages, and the farms. Now, of course, in areas like Zambia, we had to also partner with some organizations to teach them on better farming methods, because there's a lot of shift cultivation, and like on the banks of the Zambezi and all that, that was really a problem. But I think after teaching them how to actually farm one piece of land and putting fences that vary between 2 kilometers and 4 kilometers. I think the biggest we did was 5 kilometers that encompassed 2 villages. They saw the sense to it. So the issue was protect the life, protect the crops, protect the community, and also leave space for elephants. So usually people say, we're doing a fence. I know of one that was being done in Sioma that was 100 kilometers. Another one was being done in Livingstone town that was 60 kilometers to keep elephants off the community area. We went in, we did a proposal, we did a feasibility study, and we were allowed to do a 25-kilometer restraining line that stopped the necessity of them doing a 60-kilometer orthodox fence that would have kept not only elephants but buffalo out of critical habitat. So the idea was, and the idea that we came up with is fence off the humans, fence off the farms, let the elephants roam Africa. So put the people behind the fence. So, of course, there's also the issue of cost, where orthodox fences cost between, I think, $800 and anything up to $8,000 to $15,000. And so the restraining lines you could put anywhere, because they start usually at around 5 or 6 feet of height, so cattle and other livestock can move across. When you get to the roads, you have your danglers, and people can actually walk across them. In most cases, you have 3 strands, like you can see here, but in other cases, you have 2 strands. And we've come up with different ways of doing it in response to how clever elephants are. And one thing that we have found, for example, is that in an orthodox fence, you'll have between 5 and 10 meters between your posts, and the elephants easily snap the wire, even without triggers. So we really grappled with that, because in Mosio National Park in Livingstone, they had a 16-strand, very sophisticated South African fence that cost them a lot of money. And the elephants used to snap it every day, power or no power. So what we did is we started doing some research, and we found that if we did our posts at 30 meters to 40 meters apart and just stretched the wire was flexible enough that the elephants could not manage to cut it, because they would grab it to their tusk, try and lift it, and the wire would slide out because it had enough leverage and enough flexibility. So for example, we did one restraining line parallel to the Mosio National Park fence. We did a 3-kilometer stretch, and this is now 3.5 years later, and it has never been cut. Elephants don't walk into the compounds anymore through there. Of course, now they go through the gate, unfortunately. They actually open the gate. So we found that we could do this across people's properties without having, without people being very adverse to it. And that meant that you could actually do small portions of properties and leave corridors and habitat open for wildlife. And we found that people were actually receptive to having elephants as long as they do not have conflict. So, of course, you use less posts, you use the trees in your area, and the cost comes down to $1,800 to $2,500 dollars per kilometer. And we have done examples in Lake Jipe, we have done examples in Mount Kenya, I've also done examples in Amboseli in some areas near Kimana, and a lot of examples in Zambia. Now, the biggest issue about this system is maintenance. Electric fences go down because nobody maintains them and because they're very hard to maintain. When you have a 50-kilometer fence going across a couple of communities, the question is, who fixes it? Is it the guy who put it? Is it the organization with the big bucks? Is it the guy who works, lives next to it? And the question is, that guy it's 50 kilometers. I only have 200 meters of common boundary with me. Why do I have to fix it? But when you have a 2-kilometer, 1-kilometer fence that encompasses a village, what happens is that the issue of ownership is very clear. You either let the fence go down and the elephants get your crops, or you let the fence stand and you are protected from the elephants. So, for example, in the villages and the places that we've done this, it's very clear who is responsible, because the person is right in the middle, they're benefiting directly, and beyond that, there's no fence. So one of the biggest things that we have learned to do is teach and actually install the fences with the people who are benefiting from them. And these systems are actually very simple. It's just plastic, wire, and solar to the energizer. End of story. And the solar also benefits the person who says, yes, the solar can lie on my roof. Now, the other thing that is very critical is that in areas, for example, in South Luangwa, we found that poaching is a serious thing. And wires are vandalized and used as snares every day. So we came up with a system that utilizes polywire. Polywire is a nylon conductive strand that has very thin strands of aluminum and copper through it. It actually is very elastic. You don't need a strain or anything. You just walk around with your bale, put it through the insulators and tie it off with a knot. It's that simple. Even a kid could put around a polywire fence. And you can see the red line across the elephant's front. That's a polywire. And the polywire will still carry 8,000 to 9,000 volts of electricity. And I can tell it stings. And the elephants can tell it stings. I've watched them, I've watched them being hit, because they thought it was flimsy. And they still run the same way they run when they hit a proper fence. So the polywire has been very useful in areas where poaching is a problem, because it serves no purpose. It cannot be used as a snare. It's just a nylon strand. It's actually about 8 millimeters to 10 millimeters thick. The other thing is that all the systems are solar powered, and that's actually a representation of a very large solar. We use solars that are from 80 watts from 50 to 80 watts, and the batteries are about 40 to 50 amperes, because these systems are not that large. But at the same time, the energizer still gives you anything up to 10,000 volts. And it gives you standby time of over 36 hours. So they're quite affordable systems. And the other thing that I was about to forget is that we had cases where people farm and do not want to leave their fences out when they're not farming, because people will steal the fences, whether they're polywire or not, to put on other areas. So we made this system so that they can actually be portable, and you can take out your insulators, take out your wire, and move it to your house. So that when the maize is in your house, you just do the strand around your house, and you stand up your solar panel, and you have your box, and your box is just very simple plug and play, and you switch it on, and you have power. So, as we said, with all these things, it's key to have partnerships and to monitor. And as an example of community scouts, we work a lot in conservancies. camera trapping and transects around bombers and around fences to see what is actually happening. And we have quite a few partners, as I mentioned, Action for Cheetahs in Kenya. We also work in partnership with conservancies and the Kenya Wildlife Conservancies Association and quite a few other organizations across the region, including WWF. So that is very key, and having the pulse of the community, and actually just being able to go into a community and say, I heard you have a problem, here's one bomber, but let's sit down and talk about this problem, because it might not be light related, but we're here to discuss whatever solution, and we might be able to link you to a person who has a solution that can work for you. Because as I say, the key is there's no silver bullet. We all have to work together. I have to be able to say, hey, you guys might need a living wall here, you might need chili fence here, you might need this and that here. And of course, there's also the human side. We found that when you do solar and you do lights, whether or not they're the standalone units, people will always say, what about us? What about the darkness in the house? What about the kid who needs to do homework? And they always connect, solar is solar. So when we do solar, we always make a point of actually going into an area and identifying needs and trying to make solutions and proposals to get funding to help those areas. Not just, we might go into an area and get called to actually sell lights. And when we get there, we find that there's a portion of the population who actually needs lights but cannot really afford the full value of the lights. We have a policy where we do not get funding that pays for more than 50%. The community still has to pay 50%, but we make an effort of doing proposals and trying to get funding for as many systems as possible. Now, when we do this, we always try to incorporate a simple house solar system, be it one light or two or three lights. Usually the basic system is about 3 lights, and this really helps with the kids. And we've done a study with WWF where it shows that the grades actually stabilize and go up, with the kids being able to access light within the houses. And of course, if you look at that roof, that is all soot, it's not paint. So when you negate the use of kerosene, it's also a health, you're dealing with a health issue. And yes, there's education and awareness. That was WildAid Day in Livingstone a few years ago. And I'm just going to clear up. And with that and with dealing with elephants, we found that one of the biggest thing as well is water. Because where you have dams, I don't know whether this is still working, where you have dams, elephants will come, and if it's in a community area, dams are sometimes limited. And what happens is, for example, on that picture up there, you get 15 elephants walking into a small dam and wallowing the whole night. And in the morning, she wants to get her drinking water, and the cattle need their water, and it's all a mess. And yes, in the long term, the elephants will make the dam bigger, and they'll make routes that will actually bring water into the dam, but in the short term, it can't work. So we've come up with systems, for example, the restraining line system, where we incorporate it with elephant-proof troughs, and we make a system where there's a float. This doesn't have a float system, but a float system which keeps the trough full, but the elephants can't break it. And we just protect the dam so that the dam is not being interfered with by the elephants or the livestock. And of course, in everything, you have to look at the long term. And the long term is that for us to have environments that are sustainable into the future, we have to bring in the community. And one of the best ways to do that is by creating conservancies in areas that conservancies are viable. And this is one thing that we really advocate for. And of course, the biggest thing is, what is the business model? What's the model you're going to base your conservancy on? One of the biggest things we're working on in the Kenya Wildlife Conservancies Association, where I'm a board member, is finding models that are away from tourism. Finding models that are more realistic, that are more stable, that don't go with the whims of tourism. For example, livestock based on conservation livestock, conservation beef, that kind of stuff. Game farming, game ranching, in tandem with orthodox wildlife conservation. So we're working on all that kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, we need to keep our landscapes and our wildlife alive for the future. So, asanteni sana. Yes.
Yeah. So I saw a talk recently by Mary from Actions and Cheese in Kenya, and they were comparing different flashing systems and found that irregular flashing was the most effective at deterring predators who were becoming habituated to a regular flashing schedule. I was just wondering, was that something that you were going to also trial?
Our original wire and bulb system had all the bulbs flashing at the same time. And I don't know whether you saw those ones, but it was actually like a wall of light. Now, I have compared the kind of flashes that are on the Fox lights and the night guards, and I've seen that the Fox lights do better than the night guards because they have an erratic kind of flash. But I think the intensity overcame all that. In our current system, since every light is individual, and every light has a slight, it's not exactly 1 hertz. Every light is slightly different. When the lights come on, because of the varying degrees of angle of lighting, they will not all come on together. So sometimes they flash like Christmas trees, like, you know, like there's a pattern, or sometimes they're very erratic, and it's minute by minute. So actually, I think we're finally getting to that erraticness by having individual lights that are flashing individually. But in my experience with the wire and bulb systems, that was not really an issue with effectiveness.